All right, guys, welcome back. So I just had like the coolest little conversation with a guy before we recorded, but let's jump into the kind of review of the week. This one comes from a member of our Facebook community. His name is Andrew. He says, wow, only 15 minutes into this Chris Harper interview. Chris is with Better Man. He says, holy crap, can't wait to finish this one. So it's cool getting a little mini review before the guy finished even listening to the podcast. So, and then he goes on to say how he talks about being a spiritual leader of your home and how a dad needs to be the leader, just how he explains it all. And then also the phrase being the prophet of the home really struck a chord with Andrew. So, Andrew, thanks for sending your comments over. Appreciate you being a valuable part of the community and chipping in the conversations inside there. So, guys, as you know, you may know, this is still a very relatively new thing. We have got a sponsor on the podcast. So, of all the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, very few ever have a real sponsor that actually pays money to advertise on the podcast. So, I'm super thrilled to have Classical Conversations be our new sponsor. So, are you interested in homeschool? Classical Conversations equips parents with a proven curriculum and support from a local community of homeschool families all walking the same path together. You're their first teacher. Be their best teacher. Learn how to make homeschooling doable at classicalconversations.com/dad journey. So super cool. Excited to partner with them and looking forward to see how things go here in the future. And with that, I am so excited to introduce you guys to Jonathan Fanning. Jonathan has the most diverse background, and the more I investigated him, the more directions I found we could go with this podcast. So I guess I'll say Jonathan is a coach, executive coach. He dives into the faith side of things. He also dives into the fatherhood side of things. He's also got some entrepreneurship about him and also his kids, even though he was a engineer and was designed to be more in that corporate mold, so he thought. And now he's out there helping people change, turn around, and become their best selves, whether it's people or companies. So welcome to the podcast, Jonathan Fanning.
You bet, Dan. It's great to be with you. And I love that you have a sponsor. Congratulations. And
Dude, that's the coolest.
And you mentioned that, and I kept thinking, I get to speak all over the world. I've spoken now on 3 continents and in 49 states. And sometimes I get to speak in the education world. One of the biggest education conferences that I get to speak at over and over and over. A woman comes up to me one day. She says, Jonathan, every good parent homeschools, whether they know it or not. And I thought, wow, that's beautiful, because I mean, all of us in some way, shape, or form are have to be involved in the education of young people around us. You know, whether you're a dad or not, even if you have no kids, even if you just have nieces and nephews or neighbors with kids, in some way, shape, or form, we're in there, right?
That's right. Absolutely right. Have you thought, when you heard that quote and you reflected on it and thought about your own family, what were some things that came to your mind?
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, so I spend my whole life, I love that you said I do a lot of things. I spend my whole life looking for game changers, and early in my career, it was game changers for big companies. It was usually like Fortune 100 companies, because I was involved in helping them turn around, and then I started thinking, like, I need to do better at not just looking for them, but then applying them, applying them in my own life, and then not just helping other people see a game changer, but help them to apply it as well, and I was in a car accident in the middle of my career, early in my career, actually. Car accident, 2 tractor trailers obliterated my car on the highway, Interstate 80, Western Pennsylvania, warm day, cold night, black ice, car starts sliding. And as it slides, it hits the guardrail, and 2 tractor trailers just tore the car apart, and it was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call. I mean, you look at the car afterwards and you think, no one survived this, because my side of the car, I was in the passenger seat. My side of the car didn't exist anymore, and then my older brother was in the back seat, where he was sleeping when the car started sliding. That part of the car, the first truck hit his door, the second truck hit my door. as the car spun. And it was a wake-up call. I like to call it like a frying pan moment, when you get hit over the head in life, you get hit over the head with a frying pan, and it's like, are you going to change anything? And after that accident, slowly I started thinking, it's great to look for game changers for other people and help them try to implement them, but you need some. I started looking in the mirror a little more often and saying, you need a few, and one of the simplest things I started doing is I started chasing this question. One of my books is called Who Are You Becoming? And I started not asking that question once in a while. I started chasing that question. I started pursuing there's a great expression that says the quality of our lives hinges on the quality of the questions we pursue. It's not a great question you ask once in a while. It's this question that you let it just kind of take over chunks of your day. And I started thinking, are you more patient now than you were last year? And the answer was not really. And are you more focused? Are you more forgiving? Are you better at communicating something to people or to yourself or to your kids? And what I slowly realized is I needed a simple way to get better at stuff. I needed a simple process on this becoming journey that actually worked. I didn't need something complicated. I didn't need to join the next, I didn't need to do the next MBA in leadership, whatever program. I didn't need a 500-page book on the topic. I needed a simple process that actually worked. And I started just picking something, like listening. And I'd say, you know what I'm going to do today? The first person I meet after 1 o'clock, they're my practice. I'm going to practice listening to that person, and I found out that it was so simple and it was so effective that I thought I need to do this in more areas of my life, and that homeschooling question that you asked, on one of my trips, I was traveling all over the world at this point, consulting for mostly massive companies. And I'm flying home from one of these trips. My oldest daughter at the time was 5. She's 5. Her name is Ella. And I had this thought on the way home. My question was kind of simple. If you pick something you want to work on and try to drive it into your life with simple processes, what's the one thing that I'd love my 5-year-old daughter to get, out of her time in our family? And I'm flying home from, I think I was out in Kansas City maybe, and I'm flying home, which maybe you're not friends with the people in Kansas City, right? As a St. Louis person, right? Or I don't know.
I do have some KC friends, quite a few of them.
Nice. But I'm flying home from that trip and I'm thinking, well, I don't know all of the things I'd like my kids to get out of growing up in my house, but one of them is courage. So that next morning, breakfast time, Ella's 5, I sat down with Ella and I said, Ella, today we're going to do Brave and Daring Day. And she's looking at me like, she's 5, she's looking at me like, okay, sounds good. And then finally she asks, like, what are we doing on Brave and Daring Day? And honestly, Dan, I didn't have a plan. I just thought, let's do stuff that you have to be brave and daring to do, and that's what I said to Ella. I said, we're going to do things that you have to be brave and daring to do, and Ella looks at me and immediately it's almost like I see these horns pop out of her head. She says, why don't we climb that thing at the park that mommy won't let me climb? And I'm thinking, and she can read my mind. I didn't answer. She said, we don't have to tell mommy. And I had one of these moments of, we're gonna get better at courage and deceit all in the same day. let's Brave and Daring and Lie to Mommy Day. Oh boy. But we ended up making a list. She's 5. We ended up making a little list. She drew pictures of stuff. She's like, what? I'd have to be brave and daring to do this, to say that, whatever. And we had, I don't know, 6 or 8 things to do. And we did go to that playground and she climbs up this thing. And it's not part of the playground. It's one of those lattices that has vines growing on it.
Oh, wow.
And it's not designed to be climbed. There's nothing to climb. you know,
Right.
and it's 12 feet high, I think, and she's 5, you know, so she goes over to it. She's like, brave and daring, you know, and I'm thinking like, do I put her up there? Because that wouldn't really be all the brave and daring. And she starts trying to climb one of these vines, and it's not, it's not going well, you know. And then there's a little tiny tree leaning over it, and she starts climbing that, but it's tiny and it's just swaying like this, and she's up there like a sloth, and it's kind of weaving back and forth, and I'm thinking like she's going to hit the ground. There are no parents in the park that think this is a good idea. You know, they're all looking like, what are you doing? What is she doing? And I'm thinking like, brave and daring day, brave and daring day, I got to let her finish the project, you know. She ends up getting up there, you know, and she's pumped. She was pumped. She's on the top. She's looking down at me like that Mount Everest, baby. You know, and I'm thinking like we all want more confidence in people around us, right? I mean, you run a company, you coach a sports team, even just you want more
Yeah.
confidence.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at my daughter Ella, and I'm thinking like, that's really confidence. So often is, I did something today that I wasn't sure I could do, you know, or I did something today that I wasn't sure that you thought that I could do, you know. And when you ask about kind of what do I think of when I think of every parent, you know, is a piece of homeschooling their kids, even if your kids are in, you know, public school or private school, or in a homeschool, but no matter what, there's a piece of it that's like, what's the lesson you're trying to teach them? What's the lesson you're trying to teach them? You know, and going forward from that, my daughter eventually loved having brave and daring days. She would say, Daddy, can we do one? And we just do it randomly. It would be, you know, it's, you know, the first day of April coming up, right? She might say like, you know, over Easter, can we do a brave and daring day when we're in, you know, when we're visiting friends and family and cousins? And, you know, I would, sure. What do you have in mind? You know, and then some of her cousins, some of her friends started liking the idea. One day, my wife, it's dinner time, and my wife, Dominica, looks at Ella. She said, oh, didn't you do Brave and Daring Day with Daddy today? And Ella's like, you know, and my wife says, what does it mean to do Brave and Daring at dinner time? And Ella, you could see she knows exactly what it means. She's like, I have to try something that I don't really want to try. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so Ella, it's funny, Ella gets it, and she starts stepping it up, and she eventually says, you know what? Thursday is try something Thursday in our house.
Hmm.
So at dinner time, she's got to try something that like she's not sure she wants to try, you know. And one of her best friends would not come over for dinner on Thursday for quite a while. I mean, quite a while. If she was at our, yeah, if she was at our house on a Thursday when it got close to dinner, she said, "I know I have to go." There wasn't another day of the week when she had to go, but on Thursday it was like, "I'm out. I'm out." My my youngest daughter Maya, when she was small, she started saying, "Well, can you?" She would say, "Daddy, can you get a different ice cream?" And like what kind? She says, "Oh, I don't care. One I've never had." I'm like, all right.
It's
And then
ice
she'd
cream.
tell
It
me like,
can't be. Yeah.
yeah, she'd tell me like, well, that's going to be my Thursday. Like, well, that's okay. We're full of courage around
That is the
trying ice
lowest
cream.
bar for
Yeah,
daring
yeah,
that we can set.
absolutely, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, but this concept, you know, I started running a series of entrepreneur camps with teenagers back, I guess it's 13 years ago now. And I've had maybe about 1,000 kids go through different versions of the camp since then. And we started putting this into the camp, you know, because I didn't do the camp to teach entrepreneurship necessarily. Yes, I think I mean, if a person can build their own business, there's a tremendous amount of freedom and personal responsibility. And it's a mirror. I love it as a mirror. Starting a business is a great mirror for your life. You say, wow, I got to get better at that. You know, but really I did it more to help develop the kids in their character, So when we ran the first camp, I kept thinking, like, I'd like there to be sort of a brave and daring component to it, and we started doing it once a week. We'd make it usually Wednesday or Thursday. It was brave and daring day in the camp, and the kids would typically the night before, the evening before they went home from the camp, we'd have them write down what are a few things that they'd move your life in a very positive direction, and they'd take some serious courage to do. And it's funny because the kids would write some stuff down, and usually it was linked to their business idea, and some of them already had a business. We've had kids who are 12 and are making, a couple $1,000s a month in their
Ooh.
business. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful because then they're not pulled by the world so much. They're like, hey, I can create, and I can add value. But they jot down who, contacting this person to potentially, work together on something, or do have them endorse our something. And they come up with this list of 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 things, and then the next day we have them with a partner assess, like, which one or two are they're huge. And you'd be, if you did that, you would be saying, this changed the way I see the world, and then we give them a little chunk of time to do it. And it's mind-boggling how these kids years later will shoot me an email, Mr. Fanning, remember that brave and daring challenge? Like, I still do it. Like once a month I do jot down, 5, 10 things that would move life forward and take some courage. And then I'm like, I give myself till the end of the week to do 2 of them or whatever. And I challenge parents to do it all the time. I challenge people in the business world to do it. One of my clients, I do leadership work with companies, and one of my clients is the CEO of a pretty good company, pretty big company. And right now he's actually on vacation, and he told his whole staff, he said, I'm completely unavailable for this chunk of time. He's like, I don't do that. Like, I never really do that. I always, in case of, and it's amazing how the bar for emergency, it's like, well, this is kind of like we have to pull the trigger on this new hire in a high level position. We just want your quick take, and the bar for like being interrupted on my vacation goes, it's like, and he said, all right, that would take a lot of courage for me to just say, you know what? No, I'm out. I think you guys are capable of doing this. We'll talk when I get back. Let me know how things go afterwards, and
so guys, right there, that's something you can apply in every area of life. So the thing that you're integral in, the thing that you feel like you have to be in and that you've got control over, instead, what if you removed yourself from that situation and allowed the people that you're in charge of or feel you're in charge of? So that could be family, that could be the sports team, that could be the assistant coaches, that could be the church community, that could be your work, that could be whatever. But if you removed yourself from that situation and was like, absolutely not me.
Oh yeah.
No communication with me. Like, what happens? The leadership, how does it step up? So I'll give you a recent example. This was just a few days ago. We were supposed to have a practice game against another softball team. I've got a group of 10-year-old girls playing in a 12-year-old thing. And there's a step up from the 10-year-old league to the 12-year-old league, whole different thing. But I've got a little bit of anxiety around a couple of things. Well, my assistant coaches don't make it. Their kids do, but the coaches don't. So I'm there on my own for the most part. I've got one other guy helping me. The referees, umpires don't show up. The other team doesn't show up. And I'm like, oh boy, we've got something to do. I guess we'll play an inter squad game, but how am I going to divide the players up where it's somewhat fair, where one team doesn't just destroy the other team? And I've got a pitcher that's never pitched from 40. I got all these challenges. I'm trying to figure it out. And in the meantime, I relayed the concept to the girl. Hey, it's no big deal. We'll just play amongst ourselves. We'll have the dads play the outfield. And in my head, I'm like, how am I going to split them up? Well, before I get too far along in my thought process, the girls have already got the teams picked out for the most part. The 2 pitchers say, I've got her. And I'm like, well, they're going to do this on their own and I don't have to be involved. And somehow they're going to, and my fear was if I let them pick the kids, then somebody feels left out or there's an argument over, but they figured it all out all on their own. And by getting out of the way, they solved it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Here's the concept, go.
Yeah.
I didn't even empower them. I just heard what they were doing. I'm like, let me get out of the way.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. You remember they made a movie about it called Alive. It was a true story, a crash in the Andes Mountains. And
Oh,
I think in
yeah.
the 70s, and they,
Alive, ALIV. Yeah.
right, right, right. And I think about maybe 46 people survived the crash, but one of the survivors was an 18-year-old kid. He turned 19 while they were in the mountains. I think they were in the mountains for something like 3 months or so. And he said he actually wrote a book called After the 10th Day, because he said what happened is they found a way to get one of the radios on the plane to be able to receive, hear the radio, but they couldn't communicate out. So they would hear the radio and they would get all these updates saying search parties are going looking for the flights, and they'd listen to the radio and try to hear the news about especially a search party. And then on, I think it was the 9th day, the announcement was, we've called off all search parties. And this kid, this 18-year-old rugby player who was on that plane, he said, after the 10th day, we had to make this commitment or this decision that no one was going to save us. That if we were to survive, it was 100% on the group of people here figuring it out, making decisions, arguing the tough things. Are we traveling or not? What are we eating? How are we eating? Are we sharing stuff? What resources? If we leave the plane, what are we bringing? What are we not bringing? Who's carrying it? And he said it was one of the most important moments of his entire life, is that after the 10th day, and it's what you said, it's sometimes it's hard. I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, and you're thinking like, all right, you're figuring it out. Go, good luck. Because today, especially, most of us have the resources to do more rescuing than we probably should.
Yes.
Abraham Lincoln had a great quote. He said, the worst thing we could do for the people we love are the things they could and should do for themselves. That quote bothers me. It bothers me because there's all these things I could do for people in my world, and sometimes it's like, yeah, but if they're one of your kids, it's that, am I preparing them or am I protecting them? And if
it's somewhat embarrassing. My 9-year-old can't tie her shoes.
There you go.
So the other day she says, Mom, will you, answer this question for me on my homework? Mm-hmm. And my wife says, no, you got to do your own homework. I may help you with technique or think through or any of that. And she complains again. And she's like, Mom, I just want you to do this for me. I just don't like this. And I was like, sweetie, we're going to do your homework now. And then we're going to tie your shoes for you. Just because you don't want to doesn't mean. I'm like, in this shoe tying thing, it's about to be over with.
Oh yeah.
But Dad, I like it when the adults, that makes me feel good when the adult takes. Little manipulator that one is. She's good at playing the system.
Yeah, there's a phrase I've gotten good at using with my daughters, and now my nieces and nephews a lot. Even I tell them, I say, I love you too much to do this for you. I love you too much to let you keep going with a habit that in 10 years you're going to be so unhappy that you have. I love you too much to let you waste 4 hours watching that. I love you too much, and it's interesting because my kids now, they anticipate it, and I'm like, I'm okay with that. Because and sometimes they'll say, but Daddy, when you were my age, I'm like, okay, so if I was doing things that I wish I didn't do when I was your age, I had a mentor, Dan, years ago. He was actually a monk. He was a monk, and he would tell me he was a unique monk. He was brilliant.
We all are.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But so this one, he was brilliant and passionate. I mean, he had family members that said, "Why did you waste your life being a monk?" because he was,
Oof.
they're like, you should have been a lawyer, a doctor, a business person. You would have all these things, but he was also incredibly human. I mean, he was he had plenty of, he would say things and you're like, you're not allowed to say that as a monk, are you? You know, but he connected with people partly because of that. And he would always tell me, he's like, Jonathan, whatever you do. And he said, me too. He said, we get to be sheepdogs, not shepherds. He said, and that means like the sheepdog is on the fringes. Sometimes they're dirty, filthy, loud, disgusting. Sometimes they're not doing all the perfect stuff, but their job is to keep everyone pointed towards the shepherd. And he said, in other words, don't try to be people's gurus. And he said, this goes for your kids as well. You can point towards what's true and good and beautiful with your kids, even though you're not there. He said, I mean, his take was, you're never going to be quite there, but that doesn't relinquish you of the responsibility to still point. Say like, that's what I'm trying to live up to, and I'm not there. I'd like to be better at it. I'm not as patient as I'd like to be. I'm not as, yeah, I did say that. You're right. I said that. I used that word. Yeah. Daddy, you listen to this music and you tell me I should, yeah. And it affects, it seeps in whether, and ooh, powerful perspective he used to give me. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was talking to a guy the other day and we were talking about how God is this God in heaven are way up here, and on earth, we're way down here. And there's a big difference between us. And as we talked a little bit, like the more we get to know Christ, the closer heaven and earth become. So the music, the this, the that, the bad habit, the word, the whatever, well, it becomes fewer and fewer and fewer because you're closer to heaven, you're closer to Christ. And sometimes it's something we've got to actively prune and chop out and go after. And other times we're just kind of moving that direction. And we look back and go, with your question, who am I becoming?
Yeah.
What's changed? How am I different now than I was a year ago or 5 years ago? Wow.
Yeah.
I don't drop F-bombs all over the place anymore. That's weird.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm closing the gap. There's always a gap though. There's always going to be, I call it the no-do gap. Like we know a lot more about leadership than we do. There's a massive gap actually between what we know about being a good dad, being a good friend, being a good spouse, being a good, being a good person, and what we do. Like there's this massive gap between what we know about saving for retirement, eating healthy, exercising in a good way. There's a gap. There's always going to be a gap. But it's intriguing. All of us are in this leadership role, and leadership's required to close any gap, right? To make any kind of significant progress. And one day, this monk that I bumped into, he tells me, he says, Jonathan, you love quoting all these people. You read all these books and you study leadership. And he says, Jonathan, who's the most effective leader in history?
Oh, yeah, I got this one.
Yeah, and I'm looking at him like, history's tough. Can we just go the last 100 years or so? And he said, no, let's do history. And then my second question was, well, how would you measure that? How would you define that? How would you quantify that? He said, I thought you do this work. Like you should have what would your definition be? And I said, it would probably be the depth of positive influence and the amount of people that are positively influenced. But I said, it'd probably be like a lasting, significant positive influence too. So it has to be like the depth of and the quantity of significant positive influence. He said, that sounds good. We'll go with that. Who is it? And I said, I'm telling you, 100 years is easier because I don't know. He said, well, 100 years, who do you have? And I said, I don't know. I'd probably put people like Gandhi and Mother Teresa in there. And he said, well, what if someone influenced them? Would you kind of have to give their influence to that? Like, okay. Maybe you would. And he said, all right, what do you got? And I said, brother, I know what you're trying to get me to say, and I was spiritually, I didn't want to say that, I was in this wrestling with, the way the monk put it is I was wrestling, but I wasn't inviting God to the wrestling match. Like I had debates, but I didn't want to debate with.
Right.
So finally he says, why don't you I mean, if you know who I'm trying to say, I mean, was Jesus an incredible influencer of people? I said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he'd probably have to be number one by my definition. And he said, so you study, you dig into Steve Jobs' life and you try to figure out all the angles, not just like one biography, but you read all the stuff because you want to know. You look at interviews about him and by him because you want to know, what's real. You want to know the people that loved working for him and the ones that didn't. And he said, so, I mean, how well do you know the life of Jesus? And I'm thinking, well, I went to church as a kid a lot, but I didn't pay all that much attention always, and he said, why don't you dig into one of the gospels, just read one of them, but read it the way you read these books that you're studying for your leadership
Ooh.
work, and like, read it, highlight it. I thought, brother, I'm not allowed to write in the Bible, right?
Right. I remember when my kids first said that to me.
Yeah.
Oh no, you can't do that.
Well, that's what I thought. I mean, somebody had given me a Bible a few years before this, and they're like, yeah, put your name in the front. I'm like, I'm not putting my name in the front. Like, no, yeah, you can put your name in the, like, no. And he convinced me to do it. And I looked through this Bible that somebody had given me, and I thought, well, the Gospel of Mark's only 20 pages. I'll start there. That's the shortest one.
Nice.
And I dug, and he said, that's a good one for you, because Mark was probably written in Rome and probably written with some of the Romans as an audience, at least in mind. And they were kind of blunt and, didn't want too much.
That's a good one for you.
Yeah.
You're a blunt a-hole.
Yeah. I'm like, thanks, brother. Thanks, monk, and then I read that and we discussed it quite a bit. And he said, like, what do you notice? What stands out? And, I said, well, I don't know. One of the things is that Jesus made a lot of people really uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
And the monk said, yeah, you've probably heard the expression, he comforted the afflicted and afflicted the comfortable. And the monk said, look, if he's not doing both of those to you right now, you're probably listening to somebody else's voice. And I thought, oh, wow. Okay. And he said, he reaches into parts of your world. Like, if he's not making you a little uncomfortable as a dad, you're convinced that there's no gap.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're a world-class dad. I ask people all the time, 0 to 10, 0 to 10, just so you have a way of looking at it. 10 is consistently world-class in any area, at when I'm with my kids, really being with them. Not a 10, and it gives you the chance to go, well, what's something that would help take it up a notch? And maybe it's as simple as, from now on, when I do the car rides with the kids, because all of us, I think, as parents, we do car rides, right?
Oh yeah.
Maybe it's I'm gonna think about a good story to share with them.
Uh-huh.
Maybe I'm going to think about a question. Maybe I'm going to tell them about something that I was trying to figure out, either, today or last year or when I was a kid. Maybe I'm going to tell them something about one of my role models, and just that thought of, how can I make this time? I love to ask the question of, like, there's things I'm going to do. There's things you're going to do. I love to ask the question of, what are simple ways I can make them more memorable and meaningful?
Oh, I love that.
And those two questions, those two words, really, they change everything.
So every good parent homeschools their kids.
Yeah.
And there's an example of it right there, of the car ride.
Yeah.
What's the topic? What are some things I can have in my back pocket that I can pull out to get a conversation going, instead of diving into electronics or listening to whatever's on the radio?
Yeah. You just had Chris Stefanik on your show, I think maybe a couple days ago. I've pulled up a talk of his, and I'll cue it up. I mean, don't tell the kids this, right? But I'll cue it up. I'll think, like, from 1:30 in, or from at the 27-minute mark or whatever, like, they'll get this. And I'll get in, I'll have it on YouTube on my phone, synced with the car, and I'll get in the car with them and have it playing, and they'll hear this, like, 3-minute whatever, and they'll be hooked. They'll be hooked. And it's partly because I'm sitting there saying, like, I'm going to be driving with them this week anyway. So why not? I mean, I have a little file in my phone, a note file where it's just something that might get my kids thinking, something that might help make the car ride a little more memorable and a little more meaningful. And I've like Father Mike Schmitz, I've listened to some of it, like,
Oh
and
my
I'll be
gosh,
like,
yeah.
ooh, that was good. That's one. And I make a note, and I'm like at minute, 13. And if the kids listen to the whole thing, great. But if they only listen to that 1 minute, that's it. Like, so often I've had my kids say, I don't know about that. I don't know if I would, like Mike Schmitz is a good example. We were listening to that recently, going back from a ski trip. My kids are skiing, and picking them up at the ski mountain on the way home. And I had it queued up, and, and Mike Schmitz is talking about, people moving to a new place, and do they just assimilate, or do they keep what really matters to them and make sure that it has a place in their routine? And the easiest thing is to assimilate short term, but long term, those pieces that are so important, and my older daughter heard that, and she said, and I'm thinking, like, I don't know, is she listening, or is she just, like, sitting in the car? And she said, I might go with the assimilate, but I shouldn't, and I'm thinking that was amen. Like, that was a good little moment.
So you're talking about taking the shift from like all the business books and all that type thing, applying that to the Bible. So for the guys that thought, I don't read books, that little part of the podcast wasn't for me.
Mhm.
I'm curious as to your thoughts on whatever book it is that you're into, or whatever topic it is that you're into. How do you take that information and get it into you, and then
Mhm.
get it ready to implement and maybe share with others? Like, what are some things just off the top of your head that are part of your things that you do, or processes that you've literally got in place?
Yeah, I love that question, Dan. This has happened many times in my life, but once very memorably. I was 18 years old, and I was a freshman in college, and I had a 4.0 my first semester, mechanical engineering. One of my professors, I said, could you write me a letter of recommendation? And I had an A in his class. I think I had the highest grade in his class across the board. But on a few of the projects, I did the least I needed to do to get an A, and
Yeah.
he knew that, and he writes me a letter of recommendation, and it's intriguing. He didn't hand it to me, and he didn't tell me this in person. He just wrote it on he was a consultant for Fortune 500 companies, and when I was 18, I thought I knew everything, and I, I'm like, I'm going to be a consultant, so I want your recommendation so I could do consulting now. Like, I don't want to wait until I'm done with college. I might as well be consulting now, because I know stuff and they don't know it, and
Right. Yeah. Come on,
yeah,
18-year-old. You
yeah,
lead me.
yeah. So he writes me this on his consulting letterhead, which I'm thinking that's perfect, because he had a bunch of Fortune 500 clients. I'm thinking this is awesome, but he puts it in my file over there in whatever career resources or something. I go get it, and it says Jonathan Fanning has a lot of talent and does just enough to get by. And I'm thinking, like, I'm gonna go to this guy's office and, like, or maybe do I white it all out and just write my own letter? Like, this is ridiculous. This is like, he doesn't he get it? Like, does he not understand? And I every now and then somebody pops into our world and they tell us what we need, and it's not necessarily what we want. There's a big gap between those two, and we don't always thank them in the moment. Right. And I love to ask people the question, myself included, who knows you better? Who knows me better? That professor or God? And one of the things, to answer your question, one of the things I do when I'm just going through a day, sometimes I'll pause and I'll pray. I'm like, God, help me to notice what you want me to notice, even if it's not exactly what I want to be noticing right now. Help me to think about what you want me to think about, even if it's not what, help me to hear, help me to find some like game changers, if you will. Help me to find something that the kids will resonate with. Or when I'm speaking before a big audience, I was just I do a lot of keynotes at big conferences. And I before the conference, I'm always praying. I'm like, God, help me to talk about what you have in mind for them, not necessarily what I have in mind. And it's a challenging prayer. I think it's as a dad, there are certain questions I'm always hoping my kids will ask. Like I'm always hoping my kids will say, Father, would you like us to do more things around the house on a regular basis? Like I'm always waiting for that. Like, come on. Yes, there's a few things. Here they are. And I think God, like, is better father than I am, is like, I'm waiting for you to ask that question. I think God is waiting for us to ask that question. And, I'll try to let God point me to things that I need to notice this time. And then I don't need the whole book. I've said it many times. I don't need the 500-page book, but I need the one thing in there that's like, bam, bam. Like I reread certain books on a regular basis, and I don't reread the whole book. Sometimes I just reread a handful of the highlights in there. And it's the same thing if you don't read a lot. It's the same thing with having 5 quotes that really get you thinking, but have them somewhere where you can scroll through them, or have them on your wall where you go like that one. Huh. And one of those books is Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
And he tells I think it's towards the end of the book. I was just rereading this in January. He says, when they have an old arch, like you picture you're in Ireland, and you see this old stone arch. He said, when there's an old decrepit arch and it needs repair, he said, the first thing they do is they put more weight on it, because that forces the arch to come together and be, fill the missing gaps. And he said, that's where most of us are. Like most of us need a little more weight on ourselves. And like for the last 2 months, I've been thinking a ton about just that one thought, just that one thought of like this arch that needs a little more pressure, positive pressure, very, very positive pressure. And a piece of that is, Dan, is you and me talking, right? Because you challenge me here and I challenge you there, maybe, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
to all the dads out there, all the guys out there listening, you have some friends who you're comfortable with, and then you probably have some people in your life that they make you, I call it, positively uncomfortable. And most of us don't go find those people enough. Or we don't go and give them permission to make us positively uncomfortable. That monk I had in my life, he passed away 3.5 years ago. And when he passed away, I was devastated, because he was one of the few people in my life that was like, he never let you get away with stuff. Like he would ask you a question about something and you'd go, like something about your marriage, something about your, how you doing? Jonathan, you got a bunch of nieces and nephews, and I bet they need, I don't know, I bet they need something from you. Like, what is it that they need from you that they're not getting in their environment right now? I would just look at them like, oh, well, yeah, I have an answer to that question. I do have an answer to that question, but it's like, well, are you stepping in, or are you kind of, and, next time I would see him, if it was a couple months later, he'd bring it back up, how you doing? And it might be like that person doesn't let you influence them at all yet, which means you got to start texting them now and then saying, hey, how's school going today? And they're like, first they're thinking like, why is my uncle texting me? And he's like, you might have to start with like building some level of relationship.
Yeah.
Right? But he was one of those people. You want a game changer in your life? I mean, all of us need them. Go find one more person that makes you positively uncomfortable. Whew. Go find one. When the monk passed away, I was devastated. And then finally it hit me that I have people like that around me that could be more like, and I don't go out of my way to, like, I have to build the relationship with them.
Yes.
Maybe I don't know them that well, because maybe I need to go and get them coffee, and ask them stuff.
Yes.
Oh,
So I talk about
and-
that all the time with people, in my sphere, and then also on the podcast of the person that's a few steps ahead of you or 100 steps ahead of you.
yeah.
Sometimes it's as simple as getting them coffee. Sometimes it's simple as passing them a compliment. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "Hey, on page 72 of your book, that sentence meant a lot." Sometimes it's as simple as giving them a smile. And, you know, it doesn't have to be $1,000. It doesn't have to be something monumental. You don't have to get your doctorate degree to become worthy to talk to that person and include them in your life. If you just become, valuable, if you just become a person that they want to have around,
Mhm.
you'll be able to build these relationships, and it really doesn't take all that much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and we need those people. And I think in
Yes.
life there's kind of a rubber band around us that, like, if we're pulling people up, they're exerting a pressure on us, pulling us that way, right? And we need some people that are pulling us up too. Otherwise, it's it's a hard journey. You're like, I'm trying to get all of you to where, to where I am, to where I am. Yeah. Another thing when that monk passed away that really hit me was this. It was, everybody needs more people like that in their world. And it was like, Jonathan, look in the mirror. You need to step up and do a better job of being that for some people in your,
Mm.
and I thought, well, one thing he did was he you could tell he cared about you. You could tell, you could feel it, but he cared about you in the future as well. And he was never willing to, like, just be comfortable in the moment. He would go, look, like, do something about this. Yeah, he was willing to have those tough conversations. He was willing to, and I started thinking, like, what's a tough conversation I need to have with me? What's a tough conversation that the monk would be having with me right now? And then, it goes back to that brave and daring conversation we were talking about earlier. Who can I ask this question to, or who can I tell this story to, or who can I do something with this about? I've been involved in teen work for a long time. I do teen entrepreneur camps and leadership, and I teach confirmation classes, and I do retreats with teens. And I was doing a confirmation class, and I kept thinking, like, how do I make this more memorable and meaningful? Memorable and meaningful. And I thought, well, you know what? One thing that would be easy to do, I think, and could really have a big impact, is let's invite each kid to teach a little piece of the class. So I
Yes.
thought, like, every time we have a class, I'll give, like, let's say the topic is, I don't know, humility, or the topic is forgiveness, or the topic is courage, or the topic is, love, or the topic is whatever. You get 10 minutes. And sometimes I'd give them a handful of resources to dig into. Like, I'd share a video or two, like, yeah, look up this, this video, whatever. And I started doing that. And then I thought, well, let's step it up, and parents and kids drives me crazy. The way we do most of education, it's almost like my kids are dropped off at school, and when they're done, we'll go to the graduation ceremony, and then we'll apply for colleges, and we'll send some money there, and then we'll see them when they graduate. And it should be this amazing dance or partnership where the parents are like, wow, you're digging into that topic. You're like, one of my favorite things in history was this, or, I was never into, reading the books until I read this book, which maybe you're not reading in school, but maybe you and I read it together,
Ooh,
you know?
that's such a good one there.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm thinking all this stuff in this confirmation class, and I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll invite each kid, when they're doing their little 10-minute, they have to bring an adult from their world to help with that 10 minutes.
Ooh.
And, some of the parents kind of didn't like me for it, but most of them loved it. And, one time it was, I think it was just beginning of December. It was right after Thanksgiving. And I have this kid and his dad come, and we were talking about generosity, but like generosity lived, and they had 10 minutes, and they talked about a couple things they do. And then the dad says, should I tell him about the Thanksgiving sandwiches? He says this to his kid, and this kid's like, I, I don't know, and the dad says, well, do you want to tell him about it? And the kid, you could tell he's a little resistant, and finally they start kind of co-telling the story. And, they said basically, every Thanksgiving Day, lots of family. And then somewhere around 6 or 7 at night, they start making sandwiches, turkey sandwiches or whatever. And they said they usually make about 200 sandwiches. And I'm thinking like, okay, that's nice. You make leftovers. I get it. And they said, and then we load them all into, I think, a couple of coolers, and we put it in the trunk of the car, and we go down to a part of New York City. This is a little bit outside New York City. And they said, and then usually there's one spot we stop and we open up and we hand out 200 sandwiches. And the father and the son are telling this story, and the kids in this class are looking like, who do you give them to? And they said, well, we give them to people that didn't have the meal we just had. We give them to people who, some of them have a place to stay tonight and some of them don't. And it's Thanksgiving, and it might be 17 degrees, it might be 40 degrees, it might be freezing rain, it might be sleet. It might be like we're giving out the sandwiches under the hood of the car so they stay dry. And they said, and they're gone. The sandwiches are gone in a couple minutes. It takes us a while to make the 200 sandwiches, and then they're just gone. And then we stick around and talk for a few minutes with some of the people, and then we go back home, and and we've got more leftovers than the people we just made sandwiches for have to eat for the next week. We have more leftovers than that amount. And I'm sitting there thinking like, and this was a question that the monk would have asked me, and I started asking people. I started like telling people this story, and I started asking this question. I said, it forced me to think, like, how generous are you really? How generous are you really? And it forced me to think, like, I don't make 200 sandwiches on Thanksgiving night, and I certainly could. And I mean, it doesn't have to be that, but there's a piece of my world and your world where, my 0 to 10 question, I love asking people, like, I'm not a 10 at generosity in that part of my life. And maybe that's not around food. Maybe it's, like I said, I do these leadership programs with teenagers. Part of the reason I do it is to challenge me to think, like, what's a better way? Like, I can complain about the way kids are today. I could complain about, like, come on, what's going on? Or I could try to be a positive impact on a few more.
So
How
all kinds of
generous are
stuff you
you?
said there. So the confirmation class is obviously faith-based type stuff. So kid, we
Yep.
teach it. Oh, geez, there's challenging. So immersing ourselves in a topic, we can study it, we can practice it, we can teach it. Teaching is where I find where I learn the absolute most. So in the doing, I learn a lot. In the studying, I learn a lot. But in the teaching side, I learn the most. So the kid getting to be able to grab all the material, study, think through stuff, practice it in their head, and then give the speech, they've learned the absolute most. So that is phenomenal. And I love doing that with my softball girls, is having them get out front and lead the little whatever it is exercise. So immersing yourself in a topic. So whether it's videos, audios, podcasts, guys that don't read books, whatever, get yourself an Audible copy of it and do it that way. Eventually you'll start reading books too, in the paper form, highlight this stuff, but just listening to speeches on YouTube, here's the book, but here's the guy talking about the book, and all that stuff. And you can dive into it. So the generosity one, I was with a group of guys, all super talented guys, all guys that are just all in on family, all in on business, or kind of those 9s and 10s out of life kind of people. And I was leading this group, and the generosity question came up. And most of us were like, oh yeah, give money. Like, we're pretty good at that. It's still a hard thing to do that. And then as it trickled down to, how are we helping our kids be uncomfortable because we live in a comfortable place? How do we get our kids to see the people that are uncomfortable in their daily living? And how can we benefit them? So the turkey sandwich thing just brought that to my mind. Like, and the kid doesn't even want to share. He's not trying to brag about what the awesome thing that they did was.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
It's like, no, we didn't do this for that reason. We just did this to help others.
Yeah.
we're not here to boast and lift ourselves up. So that's awesome.
I would say he was almost embarrassed about it. Like, he's like,
Yeah.
but the father pulled me aside afterwards. He said, all the cousins, nieces, nephews, they all like making the sandwiches.
Hmm.
Because it took a little while. I think they've been doing it for maybe a decade or so now. He said it took a little while before, like, well, what are we doing with them? And then, they're like, yeah, let's do the sandwiches. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've had so many good questions inside of this podcast. Hopefully you've wrote a ton down. There's
Yeah.
another one I'll throw out there is how are you and your family living generosity or living generously? And think
Mhm.
about the different areas you could do that. The
Yeah.
finance one can be the easy one,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's the time and talent.
Yeah.
Or flip side, you're like, I'm pretty good at some stuff,
Hmm.
but I'm also tight fisted when it comes to my money. Maybe it's the money side you need to let go of a little bit, but
Sure. Yeah, that's that professor with the letter of Jonathan has a lot of talent, but does just enough. Like, saying a little prayer, God, like, where am I in generosity? Where do I need a little bump? That is a prayer that will mess with you in a big way, I think. Because you start noticing things. You coach a sport, right? It seems every sport around the country needs more help. And if can you imagine if, I don't know, just one or two dads from your is softball, right?
softball, yeah.
Imagine if one or two of the dads from your softball team said, like, I can't do all the coaching, but I took some time and I looked up two or three drills that I thought are phenomenal, and here's a link to them. And whatever you want to use them, you don't want to use them, I don't care. I mean, I coach soccer quite a bit with my daughters, and I spend, it's crazy the amount of time you spend trying to map out a good practice, right? If you
So
want,
guys, listen for real. So he's not a soccer coach by trade. I'm not a softball coach by trade. So what do? We look
Mhm,
up videos, we
mhm,
find other coaches, we
mhm.
ask other real life coaches that we know that have coached, or we find the athletes that have done something for a long time. We're like, come on, help me out.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
dude, you're doing softball too. What'd you learn? And we're swapping tips back and forth. Our Instagram or our Facebook is just filled with, in your case, soccer, in my
yeah.
case, softball.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah. And it's like
sent my
I'm
whole team
constantly,
little 3-minute videos on how to hit a softball. And
yeah.
one of the parents told me, he goes, when you first send that out, I thought, what a psycho. Like, who is this guy that's thinking that we're going to work with our kids outside of practice?
Right. Are you kidding me? Yeah, we built a whole YouTube channel. Talk about parenting, right? Like, I have my daughters help build the, I'm like, which video do you think? And then I'm like, let's edit it down to be a minute because no one's watching if it's too long, and they're like, yeah. Let's, okay. They're like, all right, you own it now. And it's funny. They're like, but you're the coach. I'm like, okay. I played college baseball and basketball, and my freshman year playing basketball, it was junior college. I mean, a lot of the
Yeah.
players on the team could have been D1, but they
Yeah.
didn't have the grades to go D1.
Right.
They didn't have the SAT scores, a whole bunch of things. And we were actually, in basketball, we were ranked number 3 in the country for junior colleges. We were pretty good. But one day the coach pulls me aside in practice, and I'll never forget this. He says, Fanning, when are you going to step up and lead the team?
Ooh.
And I'm looking at the coach and I'm thinking, like, two things immediately. I'm thinking, that's your job. And number two, I'm already leading by example. Like, I'm already like, my work ethic, I'm in the weight room. Like, when he would be like, Thanksgiving break, you're coming back in better shape than when you left. I took him seriously, and he ran us when we came. I mean, it's such a short break for an athlete. You don't really get the break everybody else gets. You get like a day and a half usually, but he ran us, and a lot of the, my teammates were like, Coach, what are you doing? And I was like, hey, he said it, I'm ready, so my thought was, that's your job. And number two, I'm already doing it by example. And what he was saying, it took me a while to realize this, but what he was saying is, it's not just my job. Look at the Michael Jordans of the world. They didn't say, like, I wish the
Yeah.
coach would, like,
Yep.
they pulled their teammates aside and said, like, you got to guard that guy. And number two, within that same little story, really is, it's more than just example. Sometimes leadership is actually words. Sometimes it's actually pulling people aside and saying, like, how generous are you really? Or you got more to give here, or
Yes.
it's
So,
it's
so what
when
your
I
coach shared with you, the Deion Sanders just did that with Colorado.
hmm
Hey, we're having a break
yeah,
and we're right back at it when you guys get back. And here's
yeah,
the thing, we're cleaning out lockers too.
yeah, yeah,
So if you show up and didn't do the things, we're
yeah,
cleaning out lockers. And he
yeah,
goes, this
yeah,
isn't a threat.
right,
This is just the way it is. I'm
yeah,
not
absolutely,
threatening you. I'm just telling
yeah,
you these are the rules.
yeah, yeah. I had Dan. I'm blessed that I get to do some leadership work in some amazing places, and one of them is Mary Knoll. I don't know if you ever heard of Mary Knoll,
Oh
but
yeah. Yeah.
some people call them the Marines of the church, where they train missionaries to go and maybe get killed. They have
Okay.
a hall of martyrs in the main entrance to the building. It's a long, long hall, and it's nothing but plaques and pictures of people who went through Mary Knoll and then went and they were killed for sharing their faith, for being
Mm.
missionaries. And it's like, it's humbling. But I've had the chance to do some leadership work with them, and one of the people that works there, his name is Jerry Allen. He's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records because he played for Vince Lombardi
Oh wow.
and Don Shula
Oh my goodness.
back to back, right? And he returned. I think he had a handoff run of 99 yards, which is the longest you can.
Yeah.
99
Yeah.
point.
You can't. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't get longer. And I every time I'm there, if it's possible, I spend time with Jerry and I pick his brain. I'm like, how did how did Lombardi motivate you guys? Because you were pretty good. Like, how did he stop? Were there any ego battles? Because I get that in the corporate world, but obviously on a great sports team, you don't have that. And one of his things was this. He said Lombardi expected more from us than we ever expected from ourselves. And he said, I show up day one Lombardi's practice, and he's got us working on handoffs. And I'm thinking, like, okay, but not for long, I hope, because we got to get into and he's like, Lombardi had us do handoff stuff, like ad infinitum, like to death. And he said, like, I'm thinking, I played football my whole life. I get it. I understand how to. He's like, no. This year we're not dropping a ball. We are not letting a ball fall on a handoff. And he's like, okay. But so one thing Jerry told me, and this has to do with a lot of what we're talking about today. He said, I love meeting a new person, buying them a cup of coffee, and I ask them just one question. I say, tell me about somebody who they helped you become who you are. And he said, and I shut up for 45 minutes.
Yep.
He said, and they give me so much insight into who they are, who they were, who they want to be.
That just got on my list of great questions. I love it.
Yeah. I'm thinking, like, he said, I asked that question, and I might ask follow-up questions like when did you meet the person? But he's like, I stay on that. And he said, and I get this, like, why did you let that person have influence in your life? What do you really value? What are your challenges? What are you struggling with? Like, and I thought, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's that,
So you've got some books out there. You've got Who Are You Becoming?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like an awesome book. I love that question. And it's, if you don't know where you're going and who are you becoming? And you got to pay attention to that stuff, guys. And then your other book, I Once Was Lost.
Yeah.
And then the cool story behind your new book that isn't out yet. And I said, hey, when's your new book coming out? And you're like, the cover wasn't the right cover. And so my kids are actually designing the cover. So once my kids get finished with it, that's when the book comes out.
Yeah. There's a lot of.
And didn't they say, do I get my name on the book, Dad? Yeah. That's how that works.
Yeah, so in the research for that book, it's called Creativity Unleashed. And I do a lot of work in companies and schools and you name it on that topic. And my TED Talk's actually on that topic. But one of the things we found is the most creative people in history, they tend to pursue really good questions. And one of the questions from the research for that book I started chasing was, what are some really simple things that we could do with the kids that have the potential to change the way they see the world and their role in it? And my wife and I will talk about this question on a regular basis. Like, what are some simple things we could do this weekend? Like, hey, Easter's coming up. We're going to be doing this with family over Easter, but what are some simple things we could try to fit into the calendar over Easter or over summer vacation that have the potential to kind of like change the way they see the world and their role in it? I'll give you a real example from recently. I speak all over the world, and I give my kids this challenge of, and they now they like it. In the beginning, they weren't sure, but the part of the challenge is, if you help market for a second speaking engagement near where I'm already going, then the funds probably cover you coming with me.
Yep.
So recently I'm doing a keynote in Charleston, South Carolina, and they did some work and they were able to come with me.
By the way, we get tons of listeners in Charleston, South Carolina. Tons of listeners there.
No way. Yeah.
Headquarters of F3 is out that direction, and so
love it. Yeah, love it. I love that area. So the kids come with me. We're on Isle of Palms is one of the conferences, one of the keynotes. We're staying there. And then while we're there, we keep playing with this question. Or what are some simple things we could fit into this trip that have the potential to kind of like change the way they see the world and their role in it? And one of them was like, let's stop at this little fort that defended the colonies against the British in 17, I think 80. It might have been 76 actually. I think 8 British ships came, and we're like in that fort and checking it out, and we're looking at the cannons, and we're like, wow, this is kind of cool. And then you're like, oh, Fort Sumter's out there, and then you're like, oh, wait a second, let's read about that. And we didn't spend the whole day doing that, but it was a little pocket of it.
Yeah.
One of my pet peeves is that kids would be totally interested in lots of things, including history, if they get to touch it. If they don't get to, if it's just in a book, it's not that real, but we did a trip, we were traveling from, I think, Washington, D.C., another keynote down there, and coming back driving, and they did the trip with me on that one. And on the way back, we stopped at Gettysburg. We didn't spend the day at Gettysburg, but we went up to the, little round top and went to the extreme left flank. And we were like, reading about Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain defending this. And they're like, they're out of bullets. And I'm like, they were running down this hill and they were running up this hill. And like, this is kind of crazy. Like, seriously, can you imagine having a gun and trying to reload it and shoot somebody? And like, where would you hide behind the tree? And they were, the difference in their interest in learning about that piece of history after that was night and day.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so the book, that question, what are simple things we could do that have the potential to change the way the kids see the world and their role in it? We're finishing the book, and I've got a couple people that are pitching me on cover design, and I've got a person I usually work with on cover design. And then I thought, you know what? In line with the book and pursuing great questions, I wonder, like, if my kids designed the cover, I wonder if they, like, that would be like one of those moments where they go, wow, you can make money designing a cover of a book. You don't have to be the author of the book. You can be, the cover designer, or you can be some other piece of it. That's kind of neat. And you could do that when you're 16 or 12. Like, that opens up your perspective on the world. So my kids are now working on the cover, and my oldest starts, like, she sketches something. I'm like, I like the potential of that, and she says, she said, look really closely. And I'm looking really closely, and it has the front cover. And then over here, it has the back cover. And on the back cover, it has her name. And I said, like, oh yeah, what's that? She says, if I do the back cover, I was looking at other books, and like, a lot of times you get to put your name on the back cover, like the design, cover design by. And she's like, do I get to do that? And I thought, you know what? If your design gets approved, then yeah, you can have your name on the back cover. And then my 12-year-old all of a sudden is like, how do I do that? How do I get there too? I'm like, well, you'd have to be involved in the cover design, and she's better with dimensions, and so she's doing the what the write-up will look like, including collecting the testimonials, from other business people, authors, whatever. And the dimensions of, okay, the cover with this many pages with this publisher is going to be this thick, and so the binder, all the little dimension pieces, and it's mind-boggling. It's great, but they're slightly behind schedule.
Dang child labor.
But it's so worth it. It's so worth it. It's so amazing. Yeah,
That's
right.
awesome to be able to get them involved.
Yeah.
So question for you, anything that you want to cover? The two things I wanted to cover, we really didn't even talk about. So I want to talk about kids entrepreneur stuff, and also emotional intelligence. So we'll store those two topics for a different time. But anything you want to talk about before we close this one out? And then I always end in a challenge, and I've got one if you don't have one, but I was going to have you throw a challenge out to the guys that they can execute from this week to the next episode that comes out. So it might be simple or might be a little challenging, but something that they can do within a week's time.
Yeah, I love that. Those two topics are good topics. Sorry. I'm sorry. A good time though. Good talking with you. And you had me thinking about baseball, by the way. So it's a challenge for your listeners. We do a series called Who Are You Becoming Challenges, and we do them all the time. Sometimes they're very condensed. Sometimes they're like a 7-day challenge. Sometimes they're longer. Sometimes they're just one day. I'll give you 2 options. How's that? Is that all right?
All right. Yeah. We'll do 2.
So the first one is this, and it has a lot to do with the idea of who are you becoming. All of us have people in our world who you wouldn't be the person you are, were it not for their influence. And I find that most of us don't do an amazing job of letting those people know. Like, for example, that professor. He gave me a message, and I didn't go thank him right away. I'd love to say I thought about it, and then a week later I thought, you know what, thank you, that was something I really needed. I didn't do that. So challenge number 1 is that and maybe you do it once a day. I mean, if you do it once a day for a week, that would change the world, I think. But spend a minute thinking, like, who's somebody that I wouldn't be who I am if it weren't for their influence. Because all of us have a sports coach. Jerry Allen told me that. He said the 2 answers I get the most often on people who helped you become who you are is a sports coach or a family member. Mm-hmm. And it's his take on that is one of the reasons I invest a lot of time in sports coaching, and I take it seriously. We have a blast, but I also take it seriously, because I'm asking, like, if these kids, if something impacts them from this one little soccer season, 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, they're thinking back like, I'm glad I had that coach, because I think about that, so go thank one of those people. Maybe you do more than one. Maybe you write down 4 or 5 names. Maybe you do it. I mean, I challenge audiences all over the world to once a week sit down. Maybe it's every Friday night before you go home from work, or maybe it's every Sunday. Maybe you're in church and you think, like, God, like, help me pick a person that they really impacted my life. And maybe they impact your life, maybe they live 3 houses away from you, and just because they're always like, hey, how's it going? They're always like smiling, and maybe it's not like this profound, they got you to change your career, but they're a positive impact on your life. And find some personal, genuine, authentic way to let them know. It could be stopping by. It could be sending them a text. It could be like finding a picture from something, like, hey, remember we did that trip, and you really like I had a friend who conned me into helping him coach baseball in Italy for a couple months. What a con job, but I mean, honestly, like, I couldn't take the time off. And he kept saying, like, in 10 years, you're going to look back and think, like, wow, I missed that, and finally he conned me into doing it, and as I'm thinking about this, let people know just a picture from that trip, and say, hey, not just was it amazing, but like, you conned me into it.
Yeah.
And thank you. Thank you for that. You know, so that's one. And the second one would be apologize. Apologize to someone. You know, all of us have at least one person in our world that we owe them an apology. You know, apologize to someone. It changes the world. Hey, sorry, you know, the way I said that, it doesn't mean hey, you're not resetting everything in the world, but apologize for not being there for, you know, for something I did or didn't do, or, you know, I don't think, like, I want to be a better friend, and I don't know that I'm always there, and I apologize for that, you know.
So guys that aren't driving, write that on your hand. Write down the person's name that came up and put that on your hand. Wash your hand after you've apologized.
Ooh, I like that. I like that.
And for guys that are driving, once this podcast finishes up, back this podcast up to this spot.
Mhm.
And that'll be your reminder, so that you have a reminder to apologize to somebody. Because I think that one is huge. It could be somebody from way back, or it could be somebody that you wronged today. It could be somebody that you wronged 30 minutes ago. So I love both of those challenges. Those are phenomenal. And what if the guys want to reach out to you, check out your books, or who are some people you want to connect with? Like, you know, how do we get more Jonathan Fanning in our life?
Just, I mean, Google me. My website's my name, jonathanfanning.com. Go on there. We have a lot of videos. Sign up for a Who Are You Becoming challenge in there. You know, if you do that, then we'll let you know when we do creativity challenges. We do challenges around emotional intelligence. We did a couple building courage boot camps that were phenomenal. People loved them. So we'll probably be doing another one of those soon. So, you know, just find me online, and I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on social media too a little bit. I don't spend a lot of time on there, but you can certainly connect with me. And I love connecting with people who are like me, who know there's a gap, and
yeah,
are
absolutely.
happy to be on the journey, and you know, sometimes saying I need to make more progress, and sometimes saying, wow, look what I did this week. But, you know, we always have these whoops. All right, start over. I thought I was a good dad. You know, a good friend of mine jokes, he's like, I was going to write a parenting book when my kids were like 2 and 3, because I was killing it. Like, and then all of a sudden, you know, like, I go through these moments where I'm thinking, like, what is going on?
Yep, absolutely.
I'd love my kids to have more courage and talk in how they communicate with the rest of the world, and not necessarily with dad. You know, it's like, all right.
So funny, so funny.
Always on the journey. Yep.
Well, we will have your website linked on the show notes, and then we've got our Facebook community linked in the show notes also. So guys, thank you so much for listening to this one. I think this one's a great one to share with other dads in your life that matter, so that they can then impact their families also. So thank you, Jonathan, for truly getting out of the way and saying the stories and asking the questions that'll help men grow and become better leaders in their families, so that their families are impacted, so that they can see the potential they have and step into that potential.
You bet. Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So much fun. And hopefully I can convince you or con you to coming back sometime.
Sounds good. In between now and then, I'll see you in St. Louis, maybe somewhere at a
Yeah,
baseball
absolutely.
game.
Yeah, we'll go to a game together for sure.
Love
for
it.
sure.
Love it.
All right. Thanks, guys. Catch you next week.